So one of the most common questions that I get in inquiries is, how much does it cost? And that makes sense. Most couples have never planned a wedding before, and so they have no idea how much any of it cost. I know I didn't whenever me and my wife got married. Even though I work in the wedding industry, I had no idea how much things like caterers or florists or planners or anything like that cost. And honestly, when you start looking for wedding vendors and pricing, it's kind of hard to find an upfront cost. And that makes sense too, because as wedding vendors, there's a lot that goes into it on the back end. And so it's kind of hard to put just a flat cost right up front. I totally understand where you're at. You're looking at these websites with some beautiful work from all of these wedding vendors, but you cannot get even an inkling of an idea of what the price is. So while I can't help with other wedding vendors, I can help break down what goes into the cost of wedding videography. My name's Tommy Kirkpatrick. I own Tommy Kirkpatrick Films, and I've been filming weddings for over 7 years now. I've gone from it being a small side job up to being a full-fledged business where it's my full-time job. And it's taken me to some amazing places all over the world. I've worked simple, small, intimate weddings, and I've also worked large, extravagant weddings. I really feel like I've kind of seen it all when it comes to weddings. So I'd really love to just break down what goes into the cost of wedding videography and what you can expect to spend. So let's start with the basics. What's the average cost? According to recent surveys, the average cost of wedding videography was around $2,500. But that's an average, and that's not really the full picture. I've seen wedding videographers that are charging as little as $800 or $900, and I've seen others that are charging as much as $12,000 to $14,000 to $15,000. And that price difference seems insane to your average customer, especially if you have no knowledge of the wedding videography world. So what goes into the cost? Well, I've broken it down into 3 main categories. And the first of those is equipment and other business expenses. In order to make a quality film, you need quality equipment. If a wedding videographer showed up on your wedding day with an iPhone to film it, you'd probably panic about the quality, and rightly so. Don't get me wrong, iPhones can shoot amazing quality footage, but they're probably not up to par to film a wedding yet. Most cameras that wedding videographers use are probably in the $2,000 to $5,000 range. And you're gonna need at least 2 of those if you're going to film a wedding, because you need multiple angles of different moments. I personally have 4 cameras just to make sure I can capture as many angles as possible during the ceremony and during special moments throughout the day. And while that's a huge chunk of cost, that's just the beginning of business expenses for a videographer. There's also lenses, microphones, cases, lights, memory cards, business insurance, and music licensing. And there's a ton more, but I'm not gonna get in the weeds and bother you. Just know that equipment has a huge effect on the pricing of each and every wedding videographer. And now for number 2, it's time spent on each film. So obviously, there's weddings happening all the time. A lot of videography companies are what we call volume brands, and they take on tons of weddings, anywhere from like 40 to 100 a year, which is crazy for me to even think about. I can't imagine shooting that many weddings in a year. I would literally die. But if you do some simple math, let's say there's a wedding every Saturday, there's 52 Saturdays in a year. That also means they need to turn around those films 1 week at a time, which gives them 1 week to edit and finish an entire film, or else they start to get backlogged. And on the other side of that, you have someone who maybe films 20 weddings a year, which then gives them about 2.5 weeks to edit each wedding film. So if someone has 2.5 weeks to edit a wedding film, they have a lot more time that they could put into that wedding film if they wanted to. And that's kind of the path that I've taken throughout this whole journey. And none of this is to say that volume brands make bad or lower quality films. I know plenty that do incredible work. But it's more so to explain that if you want a wedding videographer that's gonna spend a little more time making that film unique and personal to you, that's probably gonna add to the cost. And number 3 is probably the most obvious because it's common in every single service industry, but that's skill level and experience. Skill level and experience plays a huge factor in determining the cost of a wedding videographer. Someone who has filmed 3 or 4 weddings is not gonna be nearly as adept at navigating those ins and outs of a wedding day as someone who has filmed 200. And with that experience and skill level comes a rise in demand. If a wedding videographer has been around for a long time and is known as trustworthy and used by a lot of people, they're probably gonna get more inquiries, and that demand is gonna creep up, which is then gonna increase the prices because there's only one company that all these people are vying for. Okay, so I know I've broken that down into the 3 main categories, but I also probably haven't answered your question of how much does it cost. So I'm just gonna be totally real for a minute and break down where my prices land. I just wanna preface this with, this is in no way me trying to humble brag about what I charge or anything like that. This is me trying to be as helpful and as transparent as possible so that you can have an answer to that question of how much does wedding videography cost right up front, and let you know how much you can expect to spend with me and not try to waste your time or talk you into something that you don't want to buy. So my pricing starts at about $49.90 or close to $5,000. And the average couple typically spends around $6,000 with me. This pricing structure works for me because I typically only film around 10 to 15 weddings a year. This gives me the time to focus so much more on each couple. I'm able to get to know them and their personalities, and I really get to hear the details of their story. And then in the editing room, I have so much more time to take that story and really put it into something that is unique to them and tells their story. Which is the part I really love about this job. I love people, and I love taking the time to get to know them, to really dig into the details of those stories so that I can create something that will last a lifetime. That's what this pricing structure allows me to do, and I love finding couples with those same goals in mind. It's really important to remember, as with any creative field, all of our work is subjective. It's important that you find a wedding videographer that matches the style you want at a price point that you feel is worth it. There's absolutely no shame in being honest about that. So with that being said, I hope planning goes well, and I hope your wedding is everything you could possibly want it to be. Thanks so much for watching, y'all.